Imagine waking up to the sound of armored boots storming your home, not as allies, but as enemies. This was the horrifying reality for hundreds of men across France on a single, fateful day, Friday, the 13th of October, 1307. In a coordinated strike, King Philip IV ordered the arrest of every Knight Templar he could find, charging them with heresy, blasphemy, and unspeakable crimes. But here's the twist: these weren't just any soldiers. They were the most powerful warrior monks in history, trusted guardians of pilgrims, feared fighters in the Crusades, and the medieval world's wealthiest bankers. How did a brotherhood sworn to poverty amass such influence? And why did a king they had loyally served turn on them so brutally? The Knights Templar story reads like a thriller, filled with secret rituals, whispered rumors of hidden treasures, and a downfall so dramatic it cursed Friday the 13th forever. At their peak, they were untouchable, answering only to the Pope, their vaults overflowing with gold, their reputation unmatched. But power like that invites envy, and secrets invite suspicion. Behind closed doors, accusations swirled. Did they really spit on the cross in shadowy initiation rites? Were they hiding something or someone deep within their temples? The truth was buried beneath layers of myth, propaganda, and fear, and when the king's men came knocking, the Templars' legacy was rewritten in blood and fire. Today, we're unraveling one of history's greatest mysteries, the rise and fall of the Knights Templar. From their humble beginnings as protectors of pilgrims to becoming Europe's shadow rulers, their tale is a warning about ambition, betrayal, and the price of power. We'll explore the whispered secrets of their rituals, the shocking truth behind their arrests, and the lingering question: did any Templars escape, taking their legendary treasures with them? This isn't just history, it's a saga of faith, greed, and the ultimate betrayal. And by the end, you'll see Friday the 13th in a whole new light. Jerusalem in the year 1119 was a city of danger and desperate faith. Pilgrims flooded the holy sites, but bandits and enemy soldiers lurked along every road. It was here, amid the chaos of the Crusades, that 9 knights made an extraordinary vow not to conquer but to protect, calling themselves the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. They were a ragtag group with a singular mission: shield vulnerable travelers from slaughter. Medieval chronicler William of Tyre described their early days as a struggle, writing how these men owned no lavish estates, only a single horse between 2 riders, their poverty a badge of devotion. But beneath their humble appearance lay the seeds of something far greater. In 1129, the Church officially recognized them at the Council of Troyes, transforming them from a makeshift band into a sanctioned religious order. The fiery sermons of Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, one of medieval Europe's most influential voices, sealed their fate. He praised their discipline, calling them fearless in battle, gentle in prayer, and his endorsement sent noblemen rushing to join. Donations of land and gold poured in, and within decades their ranks swelled from 9 to thousands. What made the Templars unique wasn't just their skill with a sword, it was their sacred duality. They were monks who killed, warriors who prayed, men who renounced personal wealth yet amassed staggering riches for their order. This contradiction would become their greatest strength, and one day their fatal weakness. Because when you mix absolute faith with unchecked power, someone always comes asking questions, and in the shadows, King Philip IV was already counting their gold. The Templars didn't just protect pilgrims, they revolutionized the way money moved across the medieval world. Imagine you're a traveler setting out from Paris to Jerusalem, terrified of bandits stealing your life savings on the dangerous roads. The Templars offered a solution so ingenious it still echoes in modern banking. Deposit your coins at a Templar commandery in France, and they'd hand you a coded letter, a kind of medieval traveler's check, letting you withdraw the equivalent amount in gold once you reached the Holy Land. No bulky chests to haul, no tempting targets for thieves. Their system relied on complex ciphers and unbreakable trust, making them the first international bankers. But here's the irony: these warrior monks who took vows of poverty became the financial backbone of kingdoms. While individual Templars owned nothing, their order accumulated vast estates, vineyards, and even entire towns. They loaned staggering sums to kings, like funding King Henry III's wars in England, and managed the treasuries of nobles. Their fortresses, like the legendary Crac des Chevaliers, weren't just military strongholds. They were vaults filled with gold and guarded by men who believed God himself watched their ledgers. Yet the more indispensable they became, the darker the whispers grew. How did a brotherhood sworn to humility control such wealth? What really happened in their secret initiation rites, where outsiders swore never to speak of what they saw? The Templars' power was built on two things: absolute trust and terrifying mystery. And in the shadows, their enemies were already twisting that mystery into something far more dangerous: fear. Behind closed doors, beneath the flickering torchlight of Templar preceptories, new recruits faced trials that would later become the center of scandal. Witnesses at their trials described bizarre rituals: men forced to spit on the cross, deny Christ 3 times, even kiss the stomach or base of the spine of their initiator in a grotesque parody of devotion. Most damning of all were whispers of an idol called Baphomet, a bearded head said to grant the order unholy power. But how much of this was truth and how much was coerced confession? Modern historians like Malcolm Barber point to the glaring inconsistencies in these accounts. Templars interrogated under torture, racked, starved, and burned contradicted each other wildly. Some described Baphomet as a gilded statue, others as a mummified head. One knight claimed it had 3 faces, while another said it spoke prophecies. The likeliest explanation: these confessions were a patchwork of medieval superstition, political theater, and the desperate words of broken men. Look deeper, and the so-called heresies start to unravel. The act of spitting near the cross, not on it, may have mirrored ancient Christian rites of humility, where initiates renounced pride before embracing faith. The infamous kiss could trace back to feudal customs of homage, not devil worship. Even Baphomet might have been a mangled echo of Mahomet, a medieval slur for Islam, twisted into something sinister by the order's enemies. Their symbols only deepened the intrigue. The double-headed eagle found carved in their chapels wasn't a pagan sigil but a Byzantine emblem of empire, fitting for an order straddling east and west. And the Holy Grail, while later legends tied it to the Templars, no contemporary evidence exists. More plausible is that their rumored treasure was simply their vast financial network, misconstrued as something mystical by those who didn't understand or coveted their wealth. Yet in the end, perception mattered more than reality. Every whispered rumor, every half-explained ritual became kindling for the flames that would consume them. Because when King Philip needed a reason to destroy the Templars, their secrets, real or imagined, gave him the perfect weapon. The question wasn't whether they were guilty, but who would dare defend them when even the Pope hesitated. Picture this: a line of knights clad in white mantles emblazoned with crimson crosses, standing motionless as the desert wind whips around them. The ground trembles under the hooves of an approaching army 20 times their size, but not a single Templar flinches. These weren't just soldiers, they were medieval special forces, trained to fight with a discipline that bordered on fanaticism. Their rule was simple: never retreat, never surrender. To flee from battle was to betray their sacred oath, and the punishment was expulsion from the order. This wasn't just bravery, it was psychological warfare. Enemy commanders knew that when the Templars charged, they wouldn't stop until they won or died trying. One battle perfectly captures their legendary ferocity: Montjuic in the year 1177. Outnumbered 50-1 by Saladin's elite forces, 500 Templars and a handful of allied knights did the unthinkable. They attacked, wading into the chaos on foot, their great swords carving through enemy ranks. They turned the tide of what should have been a massacre. Chroniclers wrote of Saladin fleeing barefoot, his army scattering like leaves in a storm. It wasn't just skill that won that day, it was sheer, unshakable will. But their dominance wasn't limited to land. The Templars commanded a naval fleet that prowled the Mediterranean, their black-sailed ships guarding pilgrim routes and seizing enemy vessels with ruthless efficiency. They didn't just control roads, they dominated trade, moving spices, silk, and gold between Europe and the Levant. Their ports became hubs of commerce, their warehouses overflowing with goods that made them richer than kings. Yet this very power sowed the seeds of their destruction. The more indispensable they became on the battlefield and in trade, the more they tangled with the ambitions of rulers. Kings relied on their swords but resented their independence. Their wealth-inspired greed masked as suspicion. And when the Crusades faltered, their enemies began to ask a dangerous question: if the Templars were no longer needed to defend the Holy Land, who would defend the Templars? King Philip IV of France was a ruler drowning in debt, and the Knights Templar held the key to his survival. For years, the French crown had leaned on the order's vast wealth like a crutch, borrowing staggering sums to fund wars, bribe allies, and prop up a kingdom teetering on bankruptcy. But the Templars weren't naive moneylenders, they were shrewd financiers who knew power came with conditions. When Philip demanded yet another loan to wage his disastrous campaign against Flanders, the Knights did the unthinkable: they said no. That single refusal turned a simmering resentment into a king's burning vendetta. Behind the scenes, Philip's shadowy advisor, Guillaume de Nogaret, was already weaving a web of lies. A master of manipulation, Nogaret had built his career on exploiting scandal and religious fervor. He whispered in the king's ear, spinning the Templars' secrecy into something sinister. Why did they meet in closed chapters? What rituals unfolded under cover of darkness? Their wealth, once a symbol of divine favor, suddenly became proof of corruption. Philip's letters to Pope Clement V grew increasingly frantic, painting the order as a nest of heretics who worshipped demons in the shape of a cat. Every word was calculated not to seek truth but to justify a purge. The trap was set with chilling precision. On a quiet August night in 1307, Nogaret drafted secret orders for the Templars' mass arrest, sealing them with the king's seal. Philip even timed his strike for maximum shock Friday, the 13th of October, when the order's leaders would be isolated, their communications cut. But the cruelest twist, the Templars' own banking network delivered the final blow. Philip's agents used their meticulous records to track every knight, every preceptory, ensuring no escape. The very system that made them indispensable now made them sitting ducks. As dawn broke that Friday, soldiers stormed Templar strongholds across France, seizing men mid-prayer. The charges were as outlandish as they were damning: heresy, sodomy, worshipping a cursed idol. Yet the real crime was far simpler: they had dared to say no to a king. And in the medieval world, that was a death sentence. The morning air in Paris was thick with tension as royal soldiers moved through the streets, their footsteps muffled by the pre-dawn darkness. Inside the temple, the Templars' fortress-like headquarters, The knights had no warning, no hint that the sealed orders clutched in the hands of royal officials would unleash a storm of betrayal. Those documents, locked away in iron chests until the last possible moment, contained a chilling command: arrest every Templar in France before they could resist or flee. It was history's first nationwide police operation, a masterstroke of deception executed with terrifying efficiency. Eyewitness accounts describe the chaos as soldiers burst into chapels, dragging men from their prayers. Some Templars, still groggy from sleep, reached for swords they'd never draw. Their vows forbade violence against fellow Christians. Others knelt silently, as if they'd expected this moment. In Chinon, knights were herded into the castle's dungeons, their white mantles stained with grime. At the Paris preceptory, scribes scrambled to burn records, but the king's men were too fast. The evidence they sought wasn't heresy, it was gold. Chests of ledgers detailing loans to half of Europe's nobility were hauled away, along with silver chalices and jeweled relics. Then came the interrogations. In windowless chambers, Templars were stripped, stretched on racks, and subjected to the question, a euphemism for torture so brutal even seasoned jailers winced. One night, Jean de Chalons later recounted how his feet were roasted over coals until the bones popped from their joints. Under such agony, men confessed to anything, worshipping demons, spitting on crosses, even illicit kisses. Yet the details never matched. A knight in Toulouse described Baphomet as a gilded cat. Another in Carcassonne swore it was a severed head. The truth didn't matter, only the spectacle did. At the center of it all stood Jacques de Molay, the Order's Grand Master. An old man by medieval standards, he initially confessed under torture, perhaps hoping for mercy. But when brought before a public tribunal, his defiance shocked the crowd. God knows who is wrong and has sinned, he declared, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Soon misfortune will come to those who condemn us. It wasn't just a plea, it was a curse aimed at King Philip and Pope Clement. And in a twist fate would later underscore, both men died within a year of de Molay's execution. The trials that followed were a mockery of justice. Judges handpicked by Philip ignored exonerating evidence, like the Templars' charitable hospitals or their decades of service. Witnesses for the defense vanished when 70 knights retracted their forced confessions, claiming they'd lied to escape torture. The king ordered them burned at the stake as relapsed heretics. Their death sent a clear message: the truth was whatever the crown decreed. Yet even as the pyres smoldered, whispers began. Had some Templars escaped the dragnet? Were their treasures real or mythical, hidden in vaults beneath abandoned chapels? The king got his gold, but the legends outlasted him. The dungeons of medieval France echoed with screams no one was meant to hear. The Templars' greatest trial wasn't in a courtroom. It was in those hidden chambers where royal torturers wielded pain like a pen, forcing confessions onto broken bodies. One method, the strappado, became infamous. Victims' hands were bound behind their backs, then hoisted by a rope until their shoulders dislocated, their weight tearing joints apart. Some were dropped suddenly, the jerk snapping bones. Others endured the water torture, cloth forced down their throats while water poured over their faces, simulating drowning. The message was clear: admit heresy or die in agony, and so they confessed. Knights who'd spent decades defending Christ's name now swore they'd spit on the cross. Men who'd built hospitals for the poor admitted to secret orgies. But the moment torture stopped, the truth resurfaced. When 74 Templars were brought before Pope Clement's commissioners in 1308, their wounds still fresh, they did the unthinkable, they recanted. One by one, they described how pain had twisted their words. "I would have confessed to killing God himself," muttered a knight named Pierre de Bologna, showing commissioners his scarred feet. Their defiance cost them. Philip ordered those men burned alive as relapsed heretics, their bodies lighting up the Paris skyline as a warning. The Pope's role in this nightmare was anything but holy. Clement V, weak and ailing, had initially resisted Philip's demands, but when the king threatened to charge the papacy itself with corruption, leaking documents that implicated previous popes in financial scandals, Clement folded. As scholar Helen Nicholson notes, this wasn't about heresy, it was about a king bankrupting himself on failed wars, desperate to erase his debts. The papal bull, Vox in Excelso, dissolving the Templars in 1312, was less a decree than a surrender. Yet, even in dissolution, mysteries lingered. The order's vast wealth enough to fund entire kingdoms vanished overnight. Their fleet disappeared from Mediterranean ports. And in remote preceptories from Scotland to Cyprus, men in tattered white mantles slipped into the shadows. Some say they whispered a final oath before dispersing, to preserve their secrets until the world was ready to hear them. Whether that meant hidden gold, forbidden knowledge, or simply the truth of their innocence, we may never know. But one thing's certain, when the last Templar ashes cooled, the real story was only beginning. The papal bull arrived like a death sentence, its Latin words dissolving 7 centuries of sacred vows in a single stroke. On April 3, 1312, Pope Clement V declared the Knights Templar officially disbanded, their lands forfeit, their very name erased from Christendom. The order that had once answered only to God now knelt before kings and cardinals, their legacy parceled out like spoils of war. Most of their vast estates, vineyards in Provence, castles along the Rhine, ports in Cyprus, were handed to their longtime rivals, the Hospitallers. But the transfer was less an inheritance than a looting. Chronicles from the time describe Hospitaller knights arriving at Templar preceptories to find chests pried open, relics missing, and royal tax collectors already counting the silver. Yet not every Templar vanished into the night. In Portugal, where King Denis had always valued their naval prowess, the order simply changed its name. Reborn as the Order of Christ, these knights kept their swords, their ships, and most crucially, their secrets. Their red-crossed sails would later carry explorers like Vasco da Gama around Africa's coast, fueling myths that fleeing Templars had sparked the age of exploration. The truth, while a few ex-Templars may have joined these voyages, their real contribution was knowledge, not treasure maps. Decades of guarding pilgrim routes had given them unrivaled charts of Mediterranean currents and Arab trade winds, intelligence worth more than gold to any navigator. Meanwhile, whispers of escape tunnels and hidden vaults grew louder. In Scotland, where King Robert the Bruce was excommunicated and thus ignored the Pope's orders, Templar refugees allegedly fought beside him at Bannockburn. Their distinctive battle tactics, tight formations of armored knights breaking enemy lines, mirrored the Order's signature strategies, but no solid evidence proves they survived as an organized force. More plausible are scattered individuals slipping into monastic life or merchant guilds, their pasts buried under new identities. What truly endured wasn't their gold but their legend. Within decades, tavern tales spun wild theories. The Templars had discovered the Ark of the Covenant beneath Solomon's Temple, or fled to underground cities in the Alps, or guarded the Holy Grail in a secret Swiss chapel. Even their supposed curse, the sudden deaths of Philip IV and Clement V within a year of Jacques de Molay's burning, became proof of supernatural vengeance. The irony, the very myths that painted them as heretics kept their memory alive. From Freemason rituals to Dan Brown novels, their story morphed into a mirror for every era's obsessions, wealth, power, and the thrill of the unsolved. The Templars were gone, but the mystery they left behind was just beginning. The moment Jacques de Molay's ashes scattered over the Seine, the hunt began. not just for surviving Templars, but for the unimaginable riches they supposedly left behind. Legends speak of wagons rumbling through the French countryside under cover of darkness, bound for the coastal fortress of La Rochelle. Witnesses claimed 18 Templar ships vanished from that harbor the night before the mass arrests, their holds packed with gold, sacred relics, even the fabled treasures of Solomon's temple. But here's the catch: no ship manifests or port records survive to prove it. Historians like Jacques and Bergtorf argue Philip's men meticulously inventoried seized assets, and the treasury's coffers swelled, suggesting most wealth never left France. Yet the mystery persists because the Templars were masters of secrecy. Their financial network spanned continents, their vaults were hidden beneath monasteries, and their ledgers written in ciphers even modern codebreakers struggle to crack. That hasn't stopped centuries of treasure hunters. In Scotland, Rosslyn Chapel's intricate carvings, Templar crosses, maize plants predating Columbus fuel theories that knights fled there with holy artifacts. Then there's Oak Island, Nova Scotia, where a cryptic pit dubbed the Money Pit has lured explorers since the 1700s. Diggers found layered logs, parchment, even a cipher stone, but no chests of Templar gold. Skeptics point out these sites lack concrete evidence, yet believers counter. Wouldn't the best hidden treasure leave no trail? The truth likely lies somewhere between myth and ledger books. While Philip confiscated lands and liquid assets, the Templars' true fortune may have been their financial intelligence, the maps, trade routes, and banking techniques that couldn't be burned or stolen. As for their cultural afterlife, their blend of piety and power, secrecy and sacrifice, made them irresistible to storytellers, from Sir Walter Scott's Ivanhoe, which painted them as shadowy villains, to modern films like National Treasure. The Templars evolve with each retelling. They're no longer just medieval monks, they're mirrors for our fascination with conspiracy, sacrifice, and the thrill of the unsolved. And perhaps that's the real treasure they left behind, a legend too compelling to bury. The Knights Templar didn't just vanish from history, they were reborn in our collective imagination, morphing from medieval monks into pop culture icons. Take the Da Vinci Code, where Dan Brown spun them into shadowy guardians of Jesus' bloodline, hiding explosive secrets in cryptic artworks. It's a gripping tale, but historians roll their eyes at the details. Brown's Templars are fiction wrapped in a conspiracy. No credible evidence links them to the Holy Grail or secret lineages. The real order was fixated on protecting pilgrims, not preserving heretical truths. Yet the genius of Brown's version is how it taps into their enduring mystique, the idea that these warrior monks knew something the world wasn't ready to hear. Video games took the legend even further. In Assassin's Creed, Templars aren't just medieval bankers, they're a timeless cabal pulling humanity's strings, battling assassins across centuries. The game's creators borrowed slivers of history, like Jacques de Molay's Burning, but twisted them into a sprawling sci-fi mythology. Compare that to actual Templar life. No hidden blades or ancient aliens, just meticulous record-keeping and grueling combat training. Yet the game's popularity shows how effortlessly their story adapts. Whether as heroes or villains, Templars symbolize the allure of hidden power. Then there's Freemasonry, which adopted Templar symbols with theatrical flair. By the 18th century, Masonic lodges were staging elaborate rituals with swords and aprons, claiming spiritual descent from the order. In reality, the connection is tenuous. Medieval Templars had no ties to Masonry's stonemason roots. But the symbolism stuck. The Masonic Templars' Red Cross and chivalric titles weren't about historical accuracy. They were about crafting a lineage of mystery and moral rigor. Today, groups from Brazil to Sweden claim direct descent from the original knights, complete with white mantles and pseudo-medieval ceremonies. Scholars dismiss these claims, but the impulse is telling. The Templars' real legacy isn't in bloodlines or buried gold. It's in our endless fascination with the idea that somewhere, somehow, a secret brotherhood still guards the truth. And in a world hungry for mysteries, that's a story that never grows old. Today, dozens of groups worldwide don the white mantle and red cross, claiming to be the Templars' spiritual heirs, but the line between homage and historical fiction is razor thin. Take the Osmth, the self-proclaimed sovereign military order of the Temple of Jerusalem. Founded in the 1800s, they host solemn ceremonies with medieval regalia, pledging to uphold chivalric values. Yet historians like Malcolm Barber dismiss their lineage as nostalgic theatre. There's no verifiable chain of succession linking them to Jacques de Molay's Knights. What these modern orders share isn't bloodline but symbolism, the allure of a brotherhood standing outside time. Not all revivalists are created equal. Some, like Portugal's Order of Christ, a direct offshoot sanctioned by the Pope, maintain tangible ties to Templar traditions, preserving their maritime legacy during the Age of Discovery. Others veer into conspiracy, weaving the Knights into tales of Illuminati plots or lost Atlantean tech. The difference: credible groups focus on charity and historical study, while fringe movements cherry-pick myths to fit pre-existing agendas. As scholar Helen Nicholson notes, the Templars became a blank parchment where anyone could scribble their fantasies. So why does this medieval order still captivate us 7 centuries later? Psychologists point to the perfect storm of mystery, martyrdom, and unresolved injustice. Their abrupt fall mirrors a Shakespearean tragedy: noble warriors betrayed by those they served. Their rumored treasures tap into our love for unsolved puzzles. Even their architecture fuels speculation. Across Europe, their rounded churches like London's Temple Church echo the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, while their fortified commanderies blend sacred and military might. These stone footprints whisper of a time when faith and steel were inseparable. Perhaps the real Templar legacy isn't in vaults or bloodlines, but in the stories we can't stop retelling. They remind us that history isn't just about facts, it's about the myths we cling to and why we need them. Stepping into a Templar church is like entering a stone puzzle, every arch, every carving hiding layers of meaning. Their most striking feature, the round design modeled after Jerusalem's Church of the Holy Sepulchre, London's Temple Church, consecrated in 1185, is a perfect example. Walk inside and you're surrounded by a circle of towering columns, their shadows stretching toward a domed ceiling. This wasn't just aesthetics, it was theology in stone. The circular layout mirrored the rotunda of Christ's tomb, a constant reminder of the Knights' mission to protect the holy sites. Even the light played its part. Narrow windows funneled sunlight onto the altar at specific hours, turning worship into a dance of shadows and illumination. But look closer and the mysteries deepen. Tombstones of fallen knights bear enigmatic symbols, crosses with flared arms resembling swords, cryptic initials intertwined with vines. Some scholars argue these mark burial sites of high-ranking members. Others whisper their coded maps to hidden knowledge. In Toma, Portugal, the convent of Christ's famous charola, an octagonal chapel, is painted with frescoes of angels holding Templar banners. The number 8 wasn't random. In medieval numerology, it represented rebirth, bridging the earthly and divine, fitting for warriors who saw themselves as both soldiers and monks. Their fortresses were equally ingenious. Take Crac des Chevaliers in Syria, a mountain stronghold so formidable even Saladin couldn't breach it. From afar, it looked like a sheer cliff face, its walls sloping inward to deflect catapult shots. Inside, however, lay a sacred heart, a vaulted chapel where armored men knelt beneath frescoes of saints. This duality defined Templar architecture: outer walls built for war, inner spaces designed for prayer. Arrow slits doubled as light shafts for altars. Guard towers housed scriptoriums where scribes copied biblical texts. Even their staircases spiraled clockwise, forcing attackers to wield swords left-handed while defenders struck from above with ease. This blend of piety and pragmatism didn't vanish with the Order. Malta's Hospitaller Knights later adopted Templar blueprints for their own island fortresses, while Teutonic castles in Prussia echoed the same stark grandeur. The real legacy of these buildings isn't just in their stones but in their philosophy, that strength and sanctity could coexist, and that even in battle there was room for grace. While the Templars' story ended in flames, their fellow warrior monks took wildly different paths, proof that in medieval Europe, survival often came down to adaptability. The Teutonic Knights, founded to protect German pilgrims, pivoted harder than any order after the Crusades' collapse. When the Holy Land fell, they didn't cling to lost causes. They carved out a new kingdom in Prussia, battling pagans along the Baltic coast. Their white mantles with black crosses became symbols of conquest, not charity, as they built a state so powerful it minted its own currency and rivaled kings. Yet that very ambition doomed them. By aligning too closely with secular power, they became just another political player, one eventually crushed by the rising Polish-Lithuanian alliance at Grunwald in 1410. Unlike the Templars, who fell to royal betrayal, the Teutonic Order collapsed under its own imperial weight. Then there were the Hospitallers, the Templars' eternal rivals and the ultimate survivors. Originally healers running Jerusalem's hospitals, they absorbed martial duties after the First Crusade, becoming the Knights of Rhodes, then Malta. Their genius lay in reading the political winds. When Jerusalem fell, they retreated to Cyprus. When Cyprus grew unstable, they seized Rhodes. And when Ottoman cannons made Rhodes untenable, they talked Emperor Charles V into handing them Malta, a rocky island they turned into an unconquerable fortress. Their secret, balancing piety with pragmatism. While Templars hoarded wealth, Hospitallers reinvested in naval innovation, pioneering early quarantine systems and floating hospitals. That flexibility earned them longevity. Today, the Sovereign Military Order of Malta remains a UN observer, issuing passports and running global charities, a living relic of medieval chivalry. The real legacy of these orders wasn't just in battles fought, but in ideals codified. Templar rules like prohibitions against retreating or surrendering were radical in an era when knights often fled to ransom themselves. Their discipline inspired later codes, from the Burgundian Order of the Golden Fleece to the Spanish Order of Santiago. Even modern militaries echo their ethos. The U.S. armies never leave a fallen comrade. Creed owes a debt to Templar brotherhood. Yet for all their influence, wild myths still distort their history. No, they didn't guard the Holy Grail. That legend only surfaced in the 19th century. No, they weren't occultists. Their secret rituals mirrored standard medieval oaths. And no, they didn't vanish entirely. Their banking techniques live on in modern finance. The truth is, the Templars' real treasure wasn't gold or grails, but the timeless lesson that power without adaptability is a kingdom built on sand. Let's set the record straight. The Knights Templar didn't sail to America centuries before Columbus. No matter how many weathered carvings or cryptic maps conspiracy theorists wave around. The infamous Westford Knight in Massachusetts, a supposed Templar gravestone, is actually a natural rock formation with colonial-era graffiti, and that Templar Tower in Rhode Island. Built in the 1600s by a colonial governor, not medieval monks, the hard truth, there's zero archaeological evidence linking the order to pre-Columbian voyages. The myth likely sprouted from a 19th century romantic fascination with secret histories. then ballooned when modern treasure hunters mistakenly tied Templar symbols to Norse artifacts in Canada. Then there's the persistent legend of sprawling tunnels beneath Paris, where Templars allegedly hid treasures before their arrest. Urban explorers love pointing to the catacombs' eerie passageways as proof, but historians have a simpler explanation. Those tunnels are limestone quarries, dug centuries after the Order's fall. Even the famed Templar Wall in the city's Marais district, just a medieval property boundary. The real Templar headquarters stood above ground, their wealth stored in plain sight, until royal officials carted it away in broad daylight. As for ties to the Illuminati or Freemasons, that's a classic case of historical telephone. Freemasonry didn't exist until the 17th century, and its Templar-inspired rituals were pure theater, a way to borrow the Knights' mystique, not their lineage. The Illuminati connection is even flimsier, stemming from an 18th century Bavarian secret society that cribbed symbolism from everywhere, including ancient Egypt. These myths thrive because they're irresistible. They turn disciplined bankers and soldiers into shadowy puppet masters, pulling strings across centuries. But here's what gets buried under all the speculation. The Templars' actual earth-shaking innovation wasn't hidden gold or secret maps, it was their financial system. Their network of letters of credit functioned like medieval wire transfers, letting merchants move money across continents without risking highway robbery. They even issued loans with interest, skirting church bans on usury by calling it gifts from grateful clients. Sound familiar? Modern banking owes more to these monks than to any pirate's treasure chest. Their real legacy isn't in Hollywood conspiracies, it's in the way money still moves today. Picture a medieval merchant sweating over a chest of silver coins, terrified that bandits will ambush his caravan before he reaches Jerusalem. Now imagine handing that same merchant a single slip of parchment, one that lets him travel empty-handed yet withdraw his fortune safely at the other end of the continent. This was the Templars' revolutionary breakthrough, the Bill of Exchange, a system so ahead of its time it laid the groundwork for modern banking. Here's how it worked. A pilgrim or trader would deposit funds at a Templar commandery in, say, Paris. In return, they'd receive a coded document bearing wax seals and cryptic symbols, essentially a medieval traveler's check. Arriving in Acre, they'd present this to the local Templar preceptory, where scribes would verify the cipher against master ledgers before paying out the equivalent in local currency. No bulky coin shipments, no tempting targets for thieves, just the first international financial network since the fall of Rome. Their genius didn't stop there. The Templars introduced something even more radical: credit. When King Henry III of England needed funds for his campaigns, he didn't wait for tax revenues. He borrowed directly from the Templars' treasure vaults under London's Temple Church. Records show loans equivalent to millions in today's currency, secured against future taxes or royal jewels. This wasn't charity. The order charged gifts or fees that cleverly skirted church bans on usury. Their ledgers, meticulously kept in duplicate to prevent fraud, became the bedrock of trust between monarchs and money men. At their peak, they managed accounts for everyone from French nobles to the Pope himself, turning their commanderies into the Wall Street of the Middle Ages. Compare this to the Italian merchant banks emerging in Florence and Venice around the same time. While families like the Bardi and Peruzzi pioneered early checking systems, their networks relied on personal ties and risky couriers. The Templars had something no Italian could match: an army. Their fortified preceptories doubled as secure depositories. Their armored convoys guaranteed safe passage for bullion transfers. When a Genoese banker's gold vanished en route to Constantinople, it was gone forever. When Templar funds were lost, their knights tracked thieves across borders with papal authority to reclaim every ounce. Yet this financial empire existed in stark contrast to their spiritual vows. While individual Templars swore oaths of poverty, owning nothing, not even their swords, the order itself amassed staggering wealth. Their Paris temple became Europe's de facto central bank, its vaults so overflowing that kings treated them like ATMs. Herein lay the fatal contradiction. These were monks who renounced personal riches yet built a machine that minted fortunes. Their double life as both holy warriors and ruthless financiers sowed whispers of hypocrisy, whispers their enemies would later weaponize. Because in the medieval mind, nothing was more dangerous than a man who served both God and gold. The concept of warrior monks seemed like a contradiction that scandalized medieval Europe. How could men sworn to peace and prayer also wield swords with lethal efficiency? Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, the fiery preacher who championed the Templars, tackled this head-on in his manifesto in praise of the new knighthood. He didn't just defend their violence, he sanctified it, calling them Christ's own avengers who cleansed the earth of pagans like a divine brushfire. To kill for Christ is not homicide but malicide. He declared the destruction of evil itself. This wasn't bloodlust, it was theology weaponized. Where ordinary knights fought for land or pride, Templars spilled blood only to protect the innocent, their battles a form of prayer in motion. Yet the reality on the ground was far messier than Bernard's lofty ideals. Chroniclers described Templar charges at Montjuic as near suicidal, their white mantles drenched in gore as they carved through enemy lines. They took no prisoners unless ransom was certain, and their rulebook demanded absolute obedience even if it meant standing unflinching as an arrow storm darkened the sky. This duality haunted them. How could men who kissed crucifixes at dawn also split skulls by noon? Their enemies whispered that the answer lay in corruption, but the truth was more complex. The Templars saw no conflict because they'd redefined holiness. To them, a sword swung in defense of pilgrims was as sacred as a psalm chanted in chapel. This spiritual audacity sent shockwaves beyond the battlefield. When the Templars fell, it wasn't just an order that collapsed, it was an idea. Their suppression left a power vacuum that reshaped Europe's geopolitical chessboard. With their banking network dismantled, kings scrambled to fill the void, accelerating the rise of Italian merchant dynasties like the Medici. The Hospitallers, inheriting Templar estates, became landlords more than warriors, their galleys drifting toward piracy. Even the Church's authority cracked, as Philip IV's manipulation of Pope Clement exposed how easily secular rulers could bend spiritual might to their will. The Templars' greatest legacy wasn't their gold or their myth, it was the uncomfortable question they forced the world to confront: can violence ever be sacred? And when those who claim divine sanction fall, who gets to rewrite their story? The Templars' sudden disappearance sent shockwaves through the fragile Crusader states, stripping them of their most disciplined defenders at the worst possible moment. Without the Order's ironclad fortresses and seasoned knights, the remaining Christian strongholds in the Holy Land began to crumble like sandcastles against the tide. Acre, the last major Crusader outpost, fell to the Mamluks in 1291, just 2 decades after the Templars' arrest. Eyewitness accounts describe chaos in the streets as refugees flooded the docks, their pleas for salvation echoing the very cries the Templars were founded to answer. The Order's absence wasn't just a tactical loss, it severed a lifeline. For nearly 2 centuries, their ships had ferried reinforcements and supplies from Europe. Now, with their fleet scattered or seized, the Crusader states bled out in isolation. King Philip IV's short-lived victory quickly soured into financial ruin. Sure, he'd seized Templar gold and lands enough to temporarily patch his bankrupt treasury, but the real prize, their sprawling financial network, evaporated overnight. Without the Order's sophisticated banking system, French trade with the Levant ground to a halt. Merchants who'd relied on Templar letters of credit now faced ruinous risks transporting actual coin. Even the crown's own revenues suffered. Templar stewards had managed royal estates with monkish efficiency, squeezing out every penny of profit. Their replacements, handpicked for loyalty over skill, couldn't match their rigor. By 1314, Philip's successors were begging Italian bankers for loans at crushing interest rates, the very trap the Templars had once helped them avoid. The papacy, too, reaped bitter fruit from its betrayal. Clement V's capitulation to Philip shattered the Church's moral authority, making Rome's decrees look like royal puppetry. Worse, the French king's heavy-handed influence pushed the papal court to relocate to Avignon in 1309, kicking off the so-called Babylonian captivity of the Church. For 70 years, popes ruled from this French-controlled enclave, their independence neutered. The irony, the Templars had been the ultimate papal shock troops, answering only to Rome. By destroying them, Clement had unwittingly surrendered the Church's last leverage against kings. Yet history saved its cruelest twist for Jacques de Molay's final act. As flames licked at his feet on that Parisian island in 1314, the Grand Master's last words weren't a plea for mercy, but a curse wrapped in prophecy. "God knows who is wrong," he cried, fixing his gaze on Philip and Clement. "Within a year, I summon you both to meet me before God's court." The crowd shuddered. And in a twist too eerie for fiction, both men were dead within months, Clement from a sudden illness, Philip from a hunting accident that reeked of foul play. Whether divine vengeance or mere coincidence, the timing cemented the Templars' legend. Even in ashes, they'd had the last word. Their downfall wasn't an ending. It was the spark that lit Europe's slow burn toward reformation, revolution, and the uneasy dance of church and state that still haunts us today. The crackling flames that consumed Jacques de Molay on that bleak March day in 1314 didn't just burn flesh, they ignited a legend. As smoke curled over the Seine, the last Grand Master of the Templars uttered words that would echo through history: Pope Clement. "King Philip, before this year is out, I summon you to answer before God." The crowd gasped. It wasn't a plea for mercy, but a curse hurled with the certainty of prophecy. And in a twist that still sends chills down spines, both men were dead within months, Clement succumbing to a sudden illness, Philip collapsing during a hunt under murky circumstances. Was this divine vengeance, as medieval chroniclers believed, or just macabre coincidence? Science offers sobering alternatives. Pope Clement V had been ailing for years, his body ravaged by what historians now suspect was lupus or cancer. The stress of the Templar trials caught between Philip's threats and the Church's crumbling authority likely accelerated his decline. As for Philip, the king's hunting accident near Fontainebleau reeks of medieval politics. Some accounts mention a wild boar goring him. Others whisper of poisoned wine served by a disgruntled noble. In an era without antibiotics, even minor wounds could turn fatal. Yet the timing was uncanny enough to fuel whispers of supernatural retribution. But the real mystery lies deeper. In 2019, archaeologists examining Philip's tomb at St. Denis made a chilling discovery. His skull showed fractures inconsistent with a fall from horseback. Forensic specialists noted the damage resembled a deliberate blow, possibly from a mace. Could the king who crushed the Templars have been assassinated by their sympathizers? Meanwhile, Clement's remains in Uzest revealed traces of arsenic common in medieval medicines, but also a favorite tool of poisoners. These findings don't prove a curse, but they paint a darker picture than official records suggested. Now shift focus to a dusty archive in Barcelona, where a forgotten ledger from 1312 lists payments to hooded men guarding ships bound for Scotland. Nearby, ground-penetrating radar recently revealed hidden chambers beneath Templar sites in Portugal, not filled with treasure, but with meticulously preserved records. These fragile parchments, now being deciphered, suggest something startling. The Order's true legacy wasn't gold or grails, but a network of knowledge. From Arabic medical texts to star charts more accurate than Europe's, the Templars weren't just warriors. They were medieval librarians, saving wisdom their enemies called heresy. So was de Molay's curse real, perhaps not in the way bards sang of it, but in the echoes of his defiance and the way history bent to fulfill his last words, we find a deeper truth. Sometimes the most powerful magic isn't in spells or omens, but in the unshakable belief that justice, however delayed, will have its day. For centuries, the Templars' guilt was considered historical fact until a single crumbling document turned everything upside down. In 2001, Vatican archivist Barbara Frail stumbled upon a forgotten parchment in the secret archives, its wax seal still intact after 700 years. Dated August 17, 1308, the so-called Chinon parchment contained an explosive revelation. Pope Clement V had secretly absolved the Templars of heresy charges after private hearings at Chinon Castle. The findings were stunning. Not only had the knights confessed under torture, a fact long suspected, but the Pope himself had granted them absolution, restoring their right to sacraments and Christian burial. This wasn't just a footnote, it was proof that even the medieval church knew the trials were a sham. Modern technology is peeling back even more layers of Templar history. In Portugal, archaeologists using ground-penetrating radar recently mapped the entire convent of Christ at Toma, revealing a honeycomb of hidden chambers beneath its iconic rotunda. Dr. Ana Rodriguez, lead researcher on the project, describes the findings as a medieval time capsule. The scans show perfectly preserved stables, scriptoriums, and even what appears to be a treasury vault, all untouched since the 14th century. Meanwhile, in Cyprus, thermal imaging at Colossi Castle exposed previously unknown frescoes beneath the plaster, depicting Templar knights alongside Byzantine saints. These aren't just pretty pictures, they're evidence of the Order's deep ties to Eastern Christianity, contradicting claims they'd gone rogue theologically. The most tantalizing discoveries come from underwater archaeology. Off the coast of Acre, sonar scans located the remains of a 13th century shipwreck packed with Templar seals and Venetian glassware. Marine archaeologist Dr. Ehud Galilee believes this could be part of the missing fleet that supposedly escaped with Templar treasures. But here's the twist. The cargo wasn't gold or relics, but mundane supplies, iron ingots, olive oil, and meticulously labeled sacks of barley. This mundane inventory tells us more than any treasure ever could. The Templars weren't hoarding mystical artifacts. They were running a vast, efficient supply chain to sustain their operations. What emerges from these discoveries isn't the sinister cult of legend, but something far more human, a brotherhood caught between idealism and pragmatism. Their real sin wasn't heresy, but becoming too powerful to control. When kings and popes needed scapegoats for failed crusades and empty treasuries, the Templars' wealth and independence made them the perfect target. Their story isn't just about medieval politics, it's a timeless warning about what happens when institutions prioritize survival over justice. Perhaps the greatest lesson lies in how quickly truth can be buried and how stubbornly it resurfaces. The Chinon parchment spent 7 centuries gathering dust before a curious archivist blew the dust off. Those radar scans and sonar readings, they're proving that history isn't set in stone, but constantly rewritten by each generation's tools and questions. The Templars' legacy isn't in the myths we've spun about them, but in the uncomfortable truths they force us to confront about power, fear, and who gets to write the story. History never truly repeats itself, but it whispers warnings to those who listen, and the Templars' story echoes louder today than ever. Think about the institutions we trust with our secrets today. Tech giants guarding our data, central banks controlling our currencies, even governments operating in classified shadows. Like the Templars, they balance absolute power with absolute vulnerability. One moment they're indispensable, the next they're hauled before Congress or crushed by public outrage. The pattern is hauntingly familiar. Build an empire on necessity and secrecy, and sooner or later, someone will demand to peek behind the curtain. Take modern banking, the Templars' most direct legacy. Their system of coded letters and secure transfers birthed the financial world we know, but their fatal flaw was over-reliance on royal patronage. Philip IV didn't turn on them because they were heretics. He did it because they'd become too big to fail and too rich to ignore. Fast forward to the 2008 financial crisis, when banks deemed too big to fail triggered global collapse yet faced minimal consequences. The lesson: when power concentrates in a few hands, it invites both dependence and resentment. The Templars learned that the hard way. We're still grappling with it today. Then there's the poison of rumor. The Templars' downfall wasn't just about money, it was about mythology. Whispers of their heretical rituals spread like wildfire, not because there was proof, but because the stories were too tantalizing to ignore. Sound familiar? In our age of viral misinformation, reputation can unravel faster than fact-checkers can keep up. Whether it's conspiracy theories about shadowy elites or knee-jerk distrust of vaccines, the mechanism is the same. Fear thrives in the absence of transparency. The Templars might have survived if they'd dragged their rituals into daylight sooner. Modern institutions facing scrutiny should take note. Mystery might buy short-term power, but it mortgages long-term trust. Yet the most chilling parallel is how easily systems collapse when patronage dries up. The Templars answered only to the Pope until a king decided the rules no longer applied. Today, think of companies that thrive on government contracts or social media algorithms that dance to regulators' tune. Their safety hinges on staying in favor, and favor is fickle. When Philip turned, the Templars had no allies left. Their independence had isolated them. It's a stark reminder: diversify your loyalties or risk becoming a pawn in someone else's game. So what lingers in the ashes of their story? Unanswered questions, yes, but also timeless truths. Power untempered by accountability is a ticking clock. Secrecy, however noble its intent, breeds suspicion. And no institution, no matter how sacred or sophisticated, is immune to the oldest forces of all: envy and fear. The Templars didn't just leave behind legends of treasure, they left a blueprint for how empires fall. And in their shadow, we're left wondering who holds the keys to our modern temples, and what happens when someone decides to change the locks. Even today, 700 years after the Templars' fall, their story remains riddled with gaps that historians and treasure hunters still can't fill. Take the enigma of Baphomet, the so-called idol they supposedly worshipped. Trial records describe it as everything from a gilded cat to a severed head that spoke prophecies, but not a single physical trace has ever been found. Some scholars, like Oxford's Dr. Emily Gurry, suggest these descriptions were medieval Chinese whispers, distorted echoes of Islamic reliquaries the knights encountered in the Holy Land. Others point to a chilling possibility: that Baphomet was pure invention, a Frankenstein's monster of heresy charges stitched together from forced confessions. Without hard evidence, the truth may never emerge. Then there's the vanishing fleet. 18 Templar ships reportedly slipped from La Rochelle harbor the night before the arrests, their holds allegedly packed with treasure. But maritime archaeologists have found no wrecks matching their description, and port records from the era are suspiciously silent. Did these ships even exist? Some theories suggest they fled to Scotland, where exiled Templars supposedly fought at Bannockburn. Others whisper of a transatlantic escape, though no pre-Columbian European artifacts in the Americas have ever been conclusively tied to the order. The likelier explanation, a handful of vessels may have escaped to Portugal, repurposed under the rebranded Order of Christ, their cargo less gold and more something far more valuable, knowledge. The Templars' financial records pose another tantalizing blank spot. Their ledgers, meticulously kept in cipher, vanished almost entirely after 1307. A single surviving page from the Paris Temple, now in the French National Archives, lists loans to nobles with sums that would equal millions today, just a fragment of their vast network. Historian Dan Jones notes this wasn't accidental. Philip's men burned anything that might exonerate the order or reveal debts he owed. What secrets went up in those flames? Details of loans to rival kings, evidence of royal embezzlement. The absence speaks as loudly as any document. Even their architecture hides unanswered questions. At Toma in Portugal, the Charola Chapel's ceiling bears paintings of angels holding Templar banners, but one panel shows a knight receiving a scroll from a figure in Moorish dress. Is this proof of forbidden alliances with Muslim scholars, as some claim, or simply artistic license in a multicultural kingdom? Ground-penetrating radar has revealed hidden chambers beneath Templar sites from Cyprus to England, yet few have been fully excavated. What lies behind those walls isn't just a matter of treasure. It's about understanding how the order really operated beyond the myths. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't what was lost, but what was never recorded. Templar initiation rites described in wildly conflicting trial testimonies, likely varied by region and rank. Their famed secret meetings may have been mundane administrative sessions, their whispers less about heresy and more about interest rates. The irony, the more we dig, the more the Templars elude easy categorization, not quite saints nor demons, but something far more human, fallible, adaptable, and endlessly fascinating. Their symbols, though, endure with startling clarity. The red cross on white, once a badge of protection, now graces everything from military insignia to heavy metal album covers. The double-headed eagle, carved into their chapels, resurfaces in Masonic lodges and Byzantine revival art. Even the image of two knights sharing a horse, their earliest emblem of poverty, gets repurposed as a meme about frugality. These weren't just designs, they were a visual language, one that still speaks across centuries. And in that language, perhaps the real treasure lies, not in solving their mysteries, but in keeping the questions alive. The red cross blazing against a white mantle wasn't just a uniform, it was a declaration. Worn over their armor, this crimson symbol transformed every Templar into a walking sanctuary, a living embodiment of Christ's sacrifice. But here's what most miss: that cross wasn't unique to them. The Hospitallers used white crosses on black, the Teutonic Knights black crosses on white. What set the Templars apart was how they weaponized their imagery. Their version, the croix pate with flared arms, wasn't just decorative, it mirrored the shape of medieval swords, a silent promise that faith and steel were inseparable. Walk into any of their chapels, and you'd find that same cross repeated in stained glass, floor tiles, even the hilts of their blades. This wasn't random, it was psychological branding, a way to make their presence feel divinely inevitable. Then there was the Beausaint, their iconic black and white battle standard. Chroniclers described it as a rallying point in battle, its stark contrast visible through dust and blood. But the colors held deeper meaning. White symbolized purity in their monastic life. Black acknowledged the mortal sin of killing, even in God's name. Together, they captured the Templars' impossible duality: holy men who waded into slaughter, warriors who wept over scripture. Lose the Beausaint in combat, and the punishment was severe, a year of penance, eating off the floor like dogs. Why such harshness? Because that banner wasn't just fabric, it was the soul of their brotherhood made visible. Their seals tell an even richer story. The most famous, showing two knights sharing a single horse, initially symbolized their early poverty, but look closer. Some versions show the riders holding lances with Templar banners, suggesting this wasn't just about frugality, it was about unity under their cause. Other seals layered in cryptic imagery: lions for courage, castles for their fortified networks, even the occasional 8-pointed star, a nod to the celestial compass guiding their sacred missions. But no symbol sparks more debate than the relics they guarded. Take the Shroud of Turin, which radiocarbon dating places centuries after the Templars, except for one nagging detail. In 1307, a French knight named Geoffroy de Charny, a name eerily similar to Templar Geoffroy de Charny, burned alongside de Molay, suddenly possessed a shroud bearing the image of Christ. Coincidence, maybe, but Templar inventories from Cyprus mention a cloth with a facial imprint, venerated in secret rites. Whether it was the actual shroud or a clever forgery, the link fueled legends that they'd smuggled sacred artifacts from Jerusalem's ruins. These symbols didn't vanish with the order. During the Reconquista, Spanish knights adopted the Red Cross for their Order of Calatrava. Napoleon later mimicked the Beausaint's stark contrast for his own battle flags, knowing its psychological power. Even the two-knight motif resurfaces in Masonic imagery, twisted into allegories of brotherhood. The real magic of Templar symbols wasn't in their design, it was in their adaptability. Stripped of context, they became blank slates for every generation's obsessions, from holy war to hidden knowledge. And that's how a disbanded order's imagery ended up etched on everything from cathedral walls to heavy metal albums, proof that symbols outlast the hands that wield them. The Templars didn't just fight in the Crusades, they reshaped them. On one hand, their disciplined charges turned the tide at battles like Montjuic, where Saladin's forces fled before their relentless advance. Arab chronicler Ibn al-Athir, no friend to Crusaders, grudgingly praised their ferocity, writing, "They were the fiercest fighters of all the Franks, their courage like a wall against our arrows." Yet for every victory they secured, their very presence fueled the conflicts they were sworn to end. Their policy of absolute refusal to negotiate with Muslim leaders, a stance born from religious zeal, often undercut fragile truces brokered by more pragmatic Crusader kings. In Antioch, they flatly rejected peace offers that could have spared thousands, insisting God would grant total victory. The irony, their unyielding certainty made them both feared warriors and diplomatic liabilities. Look closer, and their role becomes even more complex. While Templar garrisons guarded key routes like the Pilgrims' Road to Jerusalem, reducing bandit attacks by over 80%, their private wars with rival Christian factions frequently destabilized the region. In Acre, they clashed violently with the Hospitallers over control of the city's gates, nearly sparking a civil war while Saladin's armies camped just miles away. Their financial power further muddied the waters. By bankrolling Crusader nobles who otherwise couldn't afford to campaign, they prolonged conflicts that might have fizzled out from lack of funds. Yet without their loans, cities like Tyre might have fallen decades earlier. What emerges isn't a simple tally of heroes or warmongers, but a brotherhood trapped by their own contradictions. Their strict vows demanded they protect pilgrims, yet their methods often escalated the very violence that endangered them. Their wealth built hospitals and roads, but also incentivized kings to keep fighting for profit rather than peace. Even their famed military prowess came at a cost. Their refusal to retreat saved battles but decimated their ranks, leaving the Crusader states chronically short of seasoned knights when they were needed most. Their legacy in governance proved equally paradoxical. The Templar rule, a meticulous code blending monastic discipline with military precision, became a blueprint for later orders like the Teutonic Knights. Their network of commanderies functioned like a medieval superpower, collecting taxes, arbitrating disputes, and even minting coins in some regions. For pilgrims and merchants, this brought rare stability. Their standardized systems meant a traveler could expect the same fair treatment in Jerusalem as in Paris. But to kings, that same efficiency felt like a rival government operating within their borders. When the Templars audited royal accounts or refused to hand over funds, they weren't just bankers, they were a shadow state. Perhaps the clearest lesson lies in how both their admirers and enemies remember them. Arab historians like Usama ibn Munki recounted Templars granting safe passage to Muslim farmers during truces, while Byzantine Princess Anna Komnene scorned them as arrogant Latins who ignored local customs. This duality, respected yet resented, pious yet power-hungry, mirrors the Crusades themselves. The Templars didn't just participate in history, they became a microcosm of its darkest and most noble impulses. Long after their dissolution, their example would haunt European rulers, proving that even the mightiest institutions could crumble when their ideals collided with the messy realities of power. The Templars didn't just wear crosses, they built the closest thing the medieval world had to a modern multinational corporation. Picture this, a headquarters in Paris directing operations from England to Jerusalem, regional commanders filing quarterly reports, and a finance department so sophisticated it would make Wall Street blink. Their commanderies weren't just forts, they were franchises, each following strict guidelines on everything from armor polish to interest rates. When a merchant deposited gold in London, clerks updated ledgers with a standardized cipher, then dispatched riders to notify counterparts in Acre. This wasn't feudalism, it was a prototype of centralized corporate governance, 7 centuries before the term existed. Yet their power structure defied every norm of the era. While dukes and bishops answered to kings, the Templars bowed only to the Pope, a loophole that turned them into a sovereign entity within every kingdom. Imagine Amazon operating with diplomatic immunity in every country, its warehouses stocked with private armies. That's the scale of their audacity. Their Grand Master held veto power over monarchs' financial requests, and their network of preceptories moved money faster than any royal courier. When King John of England tried seizing Templar assets, the order simply froze his credit lines until he backed down. No medieval institution, not even the church itself, wielded such seamless cross-border authority. But here's where the comparison phrase, modern corporations exist to maximize shareholder value. The Templars sought salvation through service. Profit wasn't their end game, it was fuel for holy war. Their employees took vows of poverty and their CEO slept in a dormitory. They were a non-profit with a private military, a hedge fund with a martyr complex. This hybrid model baffled contemporaries. Feudal lords saw them as rogue bureaucrats. Bankers envied their papal tax exemptions. Even their downfall mirrors corporate scandals. Over-leveraged clients in their case, kings turned on them when debts came due. The real anomaly wasn't their power, but their accountability, or lack thereof. A modern CEO answers to boards and regulators. The Grand Master answered only to God and a distant pope. When whispers of misconduct arose, there was no investigative journalism, no SEC subpoenas, just secret tribunals where torture replaced audits. Their tragedy lies in being too advanced for their age. The systems they pioneered, global banking, standardized logistics, would later drive capitalism. But in a world unprepared for institutional power unchecked by nation-states, they were labeled heretics instead of visionaries. What survives today isn't just their financial blueprints, but a cautionary tale about power without oversight. When Vatican archivists uncovered Clement V's secret absolutions, it revealed a truth more damning than any conspiracy. The Templars weren't destroyed for their crimes, but for their independence. In the end, their real heresy wasn't spitting on crosses. It was proving that money could trump crowns, and that faith, when organized like a Fortune 500 company, could shake empires to their core. Jacques de Molay's final act wasn't just defiance, it was a challenge to history itself. As flames consumed him, his voice cut through the lies and political theater, forcing us to ask, who were the Templars really? Not the heretics of Philip's smear campaign, but architects of a world they didn't live to see. Their fingerprints are everywhere, in the armored charges that defined medieval warfare, in the ledgers that birthed modern banking, even in the way we still romanticize secret brotherhoods. They were flawed, yes, warriors who prayed, bankers who swore poverty, but their contradictions made them human, not monstrous. Consider their quiet revolutions. Before the Templars, traveling with wealth meant risking your life. They changed that, inventing a financial network so secure it laid the groundwork for today's global economy. Their commanderies weren't just forts, they were medieval embassies where a pilgrim from Genoa could find fair treatment alongside a knight from Flanders. And their discipline, it rewrote the rules of war, proving that a handful of devoted fighters could outlast armies 10 times their size. These aren't footnotes, they're the blueprint of how institutions can shape history. Yet their downfall holds the sharpest lesson. The Templars didn't crumble because they failed, but because they succeeded too well. Their independence threatened kings, their wealth tempted thieves, and their secrecy bred myths that became weapons. In a world quick to scapegoat the powerful, whether medieval monks or modern moguls, their story screams a warning. No amount of service inoculates you against envy. So how do we honor their legacy? Not by chasing ghostly treasures, but by walking the stones they walked. Stand in the round nave of London's Temple Church, where their shadows once knelt. Trace the graffiti crosses left by knights in Chinon's dungeon. Read William of Tyre's chronicles or the Chinon Parchment's absolutions, voices that survived the burnings. The Templars' true riches weren't gold or grails, but the messy, magnificent proof that history belongs to those who question the official story. 7 centuries later, de Molay's curse still echoes, remember us as we were, not as they claimed. And in that remembering, we keep their real magic alive, not in whispered conspiracies, but in the unbroken chain of curiosity that defies the pyres of any age.